Welcome to another edition of When School's Not Working. My name is Matt Barnes, and I am joined by my illustrious host, Kath Fraze. Illustrious, is that the right way to describe you, Kath? I'm not sure.
Well, I'll take that. I've been called worse.
Yes, I'm sure you have. So I'm Matt Barnes, and I run an organization called The Education Game, and we believe that every child can grow up into becoming a curious learner who has the agency to learn what they want to learn, when they want to learn it, how they want to learn it. For the first time in human history, that is possible through technology and other dynamics. I help parents learn how to do that. So that's me. Kath, could you give us a quick introduction, please?
Sure. I'm Catherine Fraze. I founded Workspace Education, which is a large, I guess you'd call it a makerspace, 32,000 square feet, for authentic, creative self-expression. And right now we're just putting together a virtual online campus for teenagers who actually they could be doing any kind of education, but it would really serve those people who are not in the school system, because it's full of advisories and mentoring and all kinds of support for teens who are going out on their own in their education, so to speak. And that's a very exciting and fun project. And we also train founders and educators who want to create alternative learning environments, whether it's online or in person. We'd love to hear from you, but today I'm super excited to have our guest Logan on, who's been unschooled his whole life. And that's quite rare to find someone who has been completely outside the system. So we're going to have a fantastic conversation.
Definitely.
Yes.
And let me just briefly introduce Logan before we'll jump in. So Logan, he's an author. You'll learn that he's doing a documentary right now, and he's the director of research at Free the People, which is a let's see, is it the Foundation for Economic Education, right, Logan? Did I get that right?
No, that's a different organization.
Oh, sorry.
That's
sorry.
Okay.
Maybe I'll let you, because you're doing a lot of things, so maybe I'll let you give me the summary of what you're working on now. And then we want to go right into kind of your experience as learning outside of the system from day one. And so turn it over to you now, Logan. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm the director of research and also the head writer and a couple other things for the Free the People Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to video storytelling. We make videos kind of promoting the ideas of personal liberty and individual responsibility. And I do write for the Foundation for Economic Education every once in a while, and they're a wonderful organization, but they are distinct from Free the People.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. So let's hear about, what was life like for you? What's your learning journey?
Sure. So my parents decided early on in the kind of early mid-'80s that they wanted to not send me and my sister to school because they had a bad time in school when they were kids, and they didn't want to subject us to that. And they thought we wouldn't do well. And they thought we'd do well academically, but they didn't think we'd do well necessarily emotionally. Mm-hmm. And so they thought, is there any other option? Is there anything else we can do? And they did a lot of research, and they came across this philosophy of unschooling through the works of mainly John Holt, who I'm sure you guys know about and have talked about on the podcast before. Wonderful writer and thinker. And they started they just didn't send us to school. And they had this philosophy that if you allow children to self-direct their education and to explore the things that they're interested in when they're interested in them, they will develop a perfectly functional, well-rounded, good education. In fact, better than you would often get by sitting them down at a desk and drilling them with math problems 6 hours a day. And so they did that, and it's sort of a leap of faith. It was not very being done at the time. I think it was illegal at the time, as a matter of fact, when they started doing it. People were being put in prison for taking their kids out of school.
Wow.
I know. So it was really courageous on the part of my parents. I have to give them a lot of credit for that. And, there's a lot of misunderstanding and hostility by their people who don't understand what you're doing. But it worked out great, and we loved it. And we were always given the option, if you want to go to school, let us know and we'll send you to school. We never wanted to. We liked what we were doing. And now me and my sister both have advanced degrees. We're both highly successful adults. And, I like to think that we're proof that you can do it this way and not be damaged individuals and not be handicapped in any way against the rest of the world.
Yeah. Kath, do you have a question?
Oh, I have so many questions. I drive past the high school. I used to when I was living in Connecticut. Now I'm luckily in the middle of the mountains in Montana. And I go past that high school and I see like a giant like auditoriums, and I see like sports fields and all those sort of things. And, you know, sometimes, you know, I have teenagers, my youngest now is 18, but I was thinking, oh, am I doing him a disservice by not putting him in school for all of those cool things that they seem to have? So my first question to you is, how important do you think those things are? And did you miss them? And how did you sort of make up, you know, the difference in what you were doing?
Well, I think you in general have a lot more access to those kind of things because you can kind of pick what you want and leave what you don't want. And you like they've done a really good job of making things like sports accessible to homeschooled and unschooled children. Me and my sister both did sports growing up. I did fencing, she did synchronized swimming. So that wasn't a problem. And then you can kind of pick and choose what other group activities you want to do, whether you want to enroll in classes of something or whether you want to just do, you know, unstructured play with other people or, you know, do drama or do art, whatever you want to do, those options are available to you. So there's really no shortage of possibilities of socializing with other people and getting to unite around a common interest. But the difference is you're not forced into it, and you're not forced to do it with people that you hate and are trapped with every day.
Right. Oh, I remember being trapped with people.
Yeah.
I remember people that I hated. And people that hated me too. I had to be trapped with those people too.
Well,
all right,
and on that point, Matt, like developing coping mechanisms just to like deal with school, that's a thing. Like, you know, I feel like I got scarred from my high school experience, and I had to unlearn some behaviors in my 20s because of what I had to do. Some parents might call that, you know, you're struggling and it's going to make you stronger. But for me, it just meant, it meant that it took me a long time to unravel those, to start, you know, beginning.
We've given so much more attention to bullying in the last few years, but people haven't seemed to be able to connect the dots that like, this is such a strange, bizarre environment. It's the only time in your life when you're trapped in a room with the same people 5 days a week, 6 hours a day for 12 years sometimes with these people, and you're legally not allowed to leave. You know, you're stuck there. If you have a job with coworkers you hate, you can quit and do something else if it's really bothering you, but you're kind of imprisoned there as a child. You really don't have any agency. And like, if those people are bullying you and they're giving you a hard time and they're making you feel bad about yourself, you're just stuck with it. There's nothing you can do about it. And it's weird to me that people think that's okay.
Yeah. Logan, I want to hear more about what like was a day in the life of you as, I don't know, middle schooler, high school. Well, I'm not sure even how you describe it. Did you call yourself a middle schooler? How did you even describe yourself? What did
Sometimes it's easy to use those terms just so people understand where you are, but yeah, it's fine. A day in the life is a little difficult to describe because every day was different. We didn't really have much structure. I enjoyed doing mathematics, so I would usually do a little bit of math in the morning because I knew that I wanted to go to college someday. And my parents did a good job of explaining to me, well, you can do whatever you want with your education, but if you want to go to college, these are the requirements you have to meet. And so I understood that and was able to meet those requirements. So I would do that in the mornings. I did a lot of reading. Tons of reading as a child. I just loved to read books. And so my parents would just get me whatever books I was interested in, I wanted to read, and I would devour those. Like I said, I did some sports. I did some fencing in my high school years. I did music lessons. I started to learn the accordion when I was, I think, 13, which is my first musical instrument. And now I'm super into music, and I play different instruments and compose music. So lots of things. I was always interested in things and wanted to try different things. And when you get burned out, you can take a break. You know, you can watch some TV or do whatever else you want to do. You can go at your own pace. But the thing I always want to stress to people when we talk about this is they think that if you don't give like structured education to your kids, where you sit them down at a desk and force them to do education 6 hours a day, that they're not going to learn anything. They won't be interested in anything. They'll just want to play video games all the time. And it's just, to me, that shows a real ignorance of what children are like. If you've ever spent time around children who are younger than school age, like a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, and just talk to them and ask them what they're interested in and ask them about the things they're learning about, they're passionate about it. They'll go on and on for hours. Like you ask a 4-year-old boy about dinosaurs and see how long you'll sit there before he gets bored of talking about them. Like this is the natural state of human beings, is to be natural learners. And I think you really kill that desire by forcing them to learn things they're not interested in when they're not ready for them, and then testing it on it incessantly. And so, yeah, me and my sister were both just completely passionate about the stuff we love. She was an artist. She was very into art. She'd spend all day painting and drawing. And she now does that for a living. So like, you know, it was great to have the freedom to explore that instead of being forced to memorize state capitals.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I love that. I mean, like, what what a leg up if you can start that early in your passion and have so much time to devote to that. I'm really interested in like, you're saying that you do it until you kind of don't like it anymore, and then you maybe do a 90-degree shift and then go and take a passion or try something else and do a deep dive into that. Do you have like big interests that you followed as a child going through unschooling, and have they manifested now in your adult life?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the things that I was doing back then, I'm still doing now. And there have been gaps in between because I'm very stubborn and I didn't like to give up on anything as a kid. I would just keep plugging away at something, even after I kind of lost interest in it. But like things that I did then, my mom always tells me I was interested in music as like a 4-year-old. I would just bang on things to make noise. And I didn't ever take lessons until I was 13, but it always came back to that. And then I kind of took a long gap away from music after that, and I came back to it later. And I think because I had the freedom to go to and from these interests as I chose, it didn't kill my love of them. It didn't make me burn out on them. Another thing, I decided I wanted to learn Latin when I was 15. I was just interested in it. And so I got a course on how to learn Latin and started studying that. And I've always maintained a passionate interest in foreign languages. I've studied like probably half a dozen foreign languages at this point, and I love them. But it wasn't the love of it. I wasn't drummed out of me by having to do it all the time. I could pick it up when I was interested in it, put it down when I wasn't interested in it. When I first started studying Latin, I was studying it like 4 to 5 hours a day because I was so interested in it. And then I got bored of it and stopped doing it for a while. But then you come back to it, and that ability to control your own pace is so important, I think.
That's a really important point because again, and Logan, I don't think I shared this with you, but I'm a recovering tiger mom. Okay. Mm-hmm. I was once an Asian woman. And so as a part of that, I used to as I started to shift into an environment where my kids are given more freedom, they would say, I'm interested in, whatever, the piano. Right. And then their interest would spike and it would fade off over the next week or two. And I was like, hey, I thought you were interested in the piano. Come on, let's go. And it was just like my own programming that in order to love something, you have to do it and do it and do it. Mm-hmm. And then somehow magically you fall in love with something that you've been forced to do. It doesn't work. So hearing your descriptions about your excitement and then cooling, but then coming back to things, that's exactly what I'm seeing with my kids.
Yeah. And for parents, it's so hard to we've been conditioned so hard to expect a certain sort of behaviors from our kids.
Yeah.
That when you see something that doesn't conform to that behavior, it's easy to get freaked out and think, oh, I'm damaging my kid in some way. I'm doing something wrong. They're not going to be successful because you're expecting one thing and you're getting something else. And I think it just requires such a leap of faith in order to understand that this is how learning happens in the natural world. But it's really not that much of a leap of faith if you have some historical perspective and realize that the way we do schooling now really only originated in the 19th century. And before that, for thousands and thousands of years, people basically did unschooling. They just lived their life in the world and they learned what they needed to learn when they needed to learn it. And it was fine. At some point, we decided we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do this different model. And it became so ubiquitous that people can't imagine anything else now. Yeah. But, Plato and Aristotle learned this way. Einstein and Mozart learned this way. It's not that hard.
Jefferson. There's a long list. So you mentioned that your parents had a tough time in school. I want to, I'm not sure how much you know about that, but what I've seen is that the parents that are most likely to consider an unschool environment or pulling them out are parents whose kids are the kids are really struggling, but usually those kids are 13, 14 years old. A lot of damage has happened at that point. And parents who are more creative or they have had such a terrible experience that they're like, like you said, there's no way I'm going to put my kid in that environment. Can you give us a little bit of background of what was the motivation for your parents and what their experience was that caused them to do this?
Yeah, sure. My dad was a slow reader in school. It took him a little while to get to reading. And so because of that, he was put in remedial classes. He was bullied. He was made fun of. He was made to feel stupid. And like, he's a genius. He's a great, incredibly talented man. He was a vice president of graphic design at Cartoon Network for years, made lots of money, highly successful career, but like never really shook this kind of lack of self-confidence that he got from people telling him he was stupid in school because he took a little longer to read,
Right.
Which is ridiculous. And then my mom was very gifted academically, but I guess you'd call her a nerd, not one of the popular kids. And so she suffered a lot socially in school and had a real problem with that. And just both of them just didn't have a good time. They hated it, and they felt they were made to feel bad about themselves and who they were. And they're both like incredible people. I love my parents so much, and I think so highly of both of them. But it's just a shame that they're put through that and made to feel bad about themselves when they really shouldn't be.
Well, and I think you're right that is a long tail on that experience. I've talked to parents who, when they're talking about their kids in school, they are physically tight and emotionally just bothered because their experience, the parents, were so terrible that now they're just deathly afraid of their kid going through similar stuff. This sort of thing is actually really common. It's quite amazing. So wow, that's, I'm glad that your parents had to go through that so that they could actually see that there's another way. But it's too bad though that they had to do that.
And I know a lot of people in that situation. I know I used to have a coworker who was very, very bright, could teach himself anything on like just watching YouTube videos, but it's not like classically academically successful in school, in public school. And so he had this self-image of himself that he was stupid. And I would always say, you're not stupid. You taught yourself video editing from scratch by watching YouTube videos and you're great at it. Like, that's not stupid. How can you possibly think that? But you get that self-image of yourself and it makes it hard to move past it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kath?
Yeah, you took me back to my experience at school, and I went into teaching because I wanted to rescue kids that were in this situation, the kids that were in classrooms and they were scared to go out at recess because the randomness of the bullying and that sort of thing. And they couldn't find their social niche because they ended up at the bottom of the pack. And I just think that's so unfair, and the cumulative effect of that can be very, very damaging.
Super. Yeah.
And almost everybody experiences that bullying throughout, or some kind of negative social experience throughout their years. So pretty much everybody I've talked to has experienced it.
Yeah, sure. All right. Question about this leap of faith. You mentioned that really doesn't require that much, because if you look at the history of mankind, this idea of school is actually pretty weird. But for most parents, and we talked about this on last week's show, Kath, I don't know if you remember, but most parents, the idea of going from this traditional, highly structured environment that they may not like, but at least they understand it, to something that is just really, really different, that's a bridge too far for a lot of parents. Do you have any sense of if your parents kind of flirted with this idea, or did they just all of a sudden they just flipped the switch?
Well, I know my mom did a lot of research before she decided to not send us to school, and she read many, many things. And I think she arrived at the idea of unschooling eventually after reading all these different books and decided that was the right way to go. So we didn't really transition, but you certainly can. My company's making a documentary right now about parents who have taken their kids out of the school system during the pandemic because of lockdowns. And we've talked to people who have started off in a very structured kind of traditional homeschooling environment, trying to replicate the classroom at home. And they started doing that, and then they realized as it went on that they didn't need to do that much. They could relax the rules a little bit, and they kind of transitioned gradually towards a more unschooling model. So yes. I think you can transition if you're scared of making it all at once. But once you see how your kids respond to having more educational freedom, I think it'll be easier to understand how that works.
Yeah.
But there's also the schedule that I think people are really obsessed with. They're like, you have to read by 6, and you have to be able to know your times tables by this age or whatever. And because you're told that over and over again in schools, and people learn things at different rates. Like I said, my dad was a slow reader. My sister was a slow reader. I was a very early reader. But it's madness to think you're going to take all these kids and put them in the same classroom at the same age and expect them to know the same thing at the same time. Right. And, you're going to have a very small slice of those kids who are on track. And then the rest of them are either going to be way ahead and super bored, or they're going to be way behind and super confused and frustrated.
Yes.
And I just don't understand how anybody thinks that makes sense.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And there's so much potential wasted in these kids, right? And they
Yeah,
need
but I
to
don't.
go out and explore and find their thing. And they're just wasting time. Like, when are they going to do it if they don't do it when they're kids? You know?
But hold on. So, Logan, I don't think anybody, like, I've actually, so I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn, and I oftentimes will say, somebody please challenge me, like someone debate me on these points. I don't think that anybody can debate anything that you said. I just don't think that people have actually thought about it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's a very hard concept for people to swallow. I've spent my whole life trying to explain how I was raised to people, and it's so hard for people to wrap their heads around. I've spent years trying to tell people that, like when you first tell people that you were homeschooled or unschooled, they think you did school, but you did it at home. It's the same
Right.
thing, but it's just in a different location. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. And it's just people can't get their minds around it. And I don't really know why. I guess because it's just so ubiquitous and universal that they don't see. And thankfully, more people are doing it now, and it's becoming less uncommon. So people are a little bit more used to the idea than they used to be. But 10 years ago, like, it was unheard of. No one had ever thought about it. Yeah. And so it's tough for people. And I understand that, and I try to ease them into it as easily as I can. But I know it's hard for people to understand.
Yeah.
I think as humans, we only have so much energy, right? And when we're doing this busy work in a school system or, studying for tests, it takes so draining. Yeah. But when you're actually working on something that you're very passionate about and you're really getting into it and you're deep diving into it, it actually gives you energy, and you have so much more mental stamina to really explore different ideas. So, I did the school at home thing, just like every other homeschooler. They start out, right? Because that's our patterning. But you realize that is draining your children so much, and they're just not loving learning. And you let the rope out a bit, and they start just going down these deep dives. And you're like, hang on a minute, they're really developing. You can see the actual self-construction happening in your child in front of your eyes, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, I'm doing this all the wrong way. And this is what happens to parents, to a lot of parents that I see through my work, is that they start off being very schooling at home, trying to do the best possible school at home, and scheduling their child like 6 hours a day. And then that over time, sort of changes to more of an eclectic, really observing and watching their child, and finding and feeding the periphery of their interest to get them super excited about learning, so they can work on their own steam.
Right.
Yeah, and it's easier on the parent too, because you don't have to be a qualified teacher to sit down with your child for 6 hours a day and drill them on math and history and all the other things that you're supposed to drill them on. You can just kind of step back and be a facilitator and figure out what are they interested in, what are they interested in pursuing, and what resources can I get them to help them do that. And then you can question them about, well, would you like to try this? Would you like to try that? And give them resources and let them do their own thing. And that's a lot less onerous on a parent than expecting them to, be a teacher like unpaid. I have a lot of people that I talk to who are like, well, I can't homeschool my kids. I don't have the time, or I don't have the knowledge, or I don't have all these other things. And I tell them, like, you don't have to do that much, really. You just have to be there for your kid and develop a relationship with them and listen to them about what they're interested in, and then help them find the path that they want to go down.
Right.
And listen, and get them talking, because that's when they really crystallize their ideas and everything they're learning, when they're explaining to you what they've learned and why this is important, and making all those connections. And that's really developing their intelligence.
All right. So real quick point on that one, Logan. My working theory is that, and what I talk to parents about is that, as you said, you got to let go of this idea of you being a teacher. What you're trying to do is help your child learn how to learn on their own. You want your child to be independent learner. So if they don't know how to learn something, the process is not to teach them. The process is help them learn how to learn it. Right. So it's just it's a shifting of how we approach learning. But you brought up your documentary. I want everybody to hear this. So you studied and you interviewed people through the pandemic who shifted from the traditional model and support of the traditional model to now support of unschooling or homeschooling. Is that what I heard right?
Yeah. So we're making this piece. We were inspired to do it because we were talking to people throughout the pandemic and seeing, the frustrations people had with the school systems. First, all the schools closed and no one could send their kids to school, and they didn't know what to do. They felt very helpless and powerless to affect anything. anything.
Yeah.
Then they started doing the Zoom learning, and everybody who did that hated it. I don't know a single person who responded well to that. They said, this isn't working. Then they kind of started letting people come back in a limited way, but the kind of measures they were putting in place in the schools were very onerous, putting kids basically in plastic tents to keep them separated from each other, which I don't know how you expect any learning to happen in that environment. I saw this one photo of like band practice where everybody was literally in a plastic tent separate from each other. It's insane. So we knew people were unhappy. And so we started to go out and talk to people, and we got a bunch of stories of mothers who said, we decided this wasn't working and we had to do something else. So we found homeschooling instead. And that was really inspiring to hear like how much they love doing it and how much they love spending time with their kids. We also talked to some policy people to like fill in the statistical background and like what would actually happen. We talked to Carrie McDonald from FEE, who I think you had on your program before.
Yep.
So yeah, we've talked to some really interesting people, and we've uncovered a diverse range of people who are doing different strategies with their kids. Some of them are unschooled, some of them are more structured homeschooled, some of them are sending their kids to sort of communal play groups to take care of them during the day. And yeah, there's just so many different ways to do it, but we wanted to show people that there's an escape hatch. If you feel trapped in the public school system and like you don't have any options, like there are options. And a lot of these mothers we talked to are working mothers, and they figured out a way to make it work. They said, well, this is important to us. It's our priority. We're going to figure out a way to make it work. Because I know so many people say, well, you can't do it because we have a 2-income household. It's impossible to do homeschooling. And well, these people are doing it. And I just wanted to put this out there as a beacon to people who are looking for something else to show that it is possible to escape.
That's huge. That's a huge service. When is that coming out?
We're editing it right now, and we're looking to release it later this year, probably in the fall sometime.
Got it. And your audience really are parents who are like, who again, a lot of the parents like you mentioned, I talked to Kath, I'm sure you're the same. I can't do it. I can't, homeschool my kid. I don't know algebra. I don't know whatever. Right. And so you're now showing a pathway of how people made that switch, right?
Yes, exactly. And yeah, I think our audience is mainly parents who are frustrated with the status quo and are looking for something else, but don't know how to take that first step and get there. Awesome. I mean, a lot of people don't even know that this is an option.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great service. I really look forward to hearing that. I think we've talked about having you back on our show when that becomes released, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah,
Kath, anything? I can keep going. I can talk to this guy all night.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really interested in like how you developed your own sense of understanding of where you are in relationship to your cohort that was in the school system. Do you feel different? Did you develop any differently because you weren't like marinating in the public school system?
It's hard to say because it's all speculation, right? Because I've never been inside a public school really, but I was able to observe other people who were friends who were in the system. And I think I would have done fine academically in the school. I think I would have been on pace with everybody else and been okay. But I think I would have been picked on a lot. I think I would have been bored a lot. And I think I would have had a hard time with it generally. And so the thing that I think is really important about self-directed learning is that it doesn't, well, there's the point that you made earlier about teaching yourself how to learn. Instead of just being spoon-fed education, you're like, oh, I'm interested in this. How do I figure out more? And you have to you're a little bit on your own, figuring out how to get that information and how to internalize it and how to memorize it. So that's really useful. The skill of learning how to learn, once you have that, you can do anything. You're unconquerable. But then more than that is also the love of learning, the passion for it, the joy of finding out new information about the world around us, which I think is just snuffed out of so many kids by being tested on it endlessly and saying, you have to memorize this, you have to have it ready for tomorrow, you have to regurgitate it. If you don't do it perfectly, we're going to give you a bad grade and make you feel bad about yourself. It'll impact your future. You won't be able to get into a good college, whatever it is. All those things I think are really damaging, because the people I know in life who were lifetime public school students, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them they don't read. They're like, why would I ever pick up a book? Why would I ever voluntarily educate myself on something? Because, I had to do that for 12 years and I hated it. I don't want to do it now. Whereas the people I know who are...
Why, right? Like if I'm not getting some recognition for learning something, why would I do it?
Yeah. And the people I know who are homeschooled or unschooled, they continue to teach themselves things every year, all the time. And I think most adults, who have that kind of love of learning and manage to preserve it, We teach ourselves things all the time, but we rarely pick up a textbook. You don't teach yourself stuff through a textbook. You teach yourself things through living and through experiencing. And there's so many great resources on the web now. You can do anything you want. I'm learning Welsh at the moment through web software, which I don't even have to have other people for. So it's just like the resources available to teach yourself things are endless at the moment, which we're in the best time ever to do this. And so it's a shame not to avail yourselves of them.
Yes. That's the part that I'm like, do you realize that for the first time in human history, we have access to learn anything we want at any time? I mean, that is a transformational statement if I have ever uttered anything, right? But it's a mental leap that people just haven't gotten there yet. But I'm really looking for this video because I think that's going to really help, or this documentary, really help parents start to go, oh, okay, it is possible. And I'm like that parent that was profiled. Boy, how did she do it? Wonder if I can replicate that with our own family. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's such a good point you make, because like I like to tell people, in your pocket, your phone, you have everything that anyone has ever known. You have access to all knowledge that has ever existed in your pocket. And like, what are you going to do with it? It's just, at that point, it just is a motivation. And it's so important to preserve that motivation to go look at that knowledge and learn the things you're interested in.
Which one of the things that I have also appreciated is, and I guess there's this guy in Thailand who I talked to, who points out he's a tech kind of educator. He's sets up these summer experiences for kids, but he's trying to make sure that this doesn't become the toy, right? Which is, I think, what most parents are worried. If I let my kids unschool or do whatever they want, they're going to spend their time playing games all day long. And most folks who I've talked to who've made that switch, there is a period where the children do go deep into video games because they've never been inspired to learn, right? But at some point, video games become boring. And then they start to venture out into other areas. And so there's another leap of faith. It's almost like the later you start some of this stuff, the harder it is for your child to unlearn some of the habits. I don't know if you've heard of that or seen some of that.
I'm really glad you made that point, because it's an argument I hear a lot. And they say, well, if I let my kid do whatever they want, they're just going to be on video games all day long. And I can't remember who said this, but I heard someone say, like, you need to give your kid a month for every year they've been in school to just decompress. So like, let them play video games. If they've been in school for 5 years, let them play video games for 5 months. And after 5 months, they're going to be sick of it and they're going to want to do something more meaningful with their lives. And that's totally a leap of faith, and people get freaked out about it. And, I'm not against like putting some boundaries on. It's not complete laissez-faire. Like, my parents gave us a little bit of restrictions on screen time with television and things like that. And obviously we didn't have the smartphone games, but we had computer games. And they said, do it for an hour and then go outside for a little while. And, putting a little bit of restriction on the kids is not a bad thing, but you got to give them time to kind of reach that realization on their own that learning about the world is more interesting than just killing monsters on a phone.
Also, I've seen it from experience at Workspace that a lot of the students coming in who had been at school, they almost feel like nervous if they're off a conveyor belt, because they have that patterning too, and they don't want to get left behind their peers. So they want to keep current. Like they've been very much competing with them, for their whole lives, right? Mm. So to go off and go like missing in action on a computer game, I think the majority of the learners or students that I see, especially if they've been in school, are not often on the, they're not, they're worried about keeping current. So they are pulling their socks up, pulling themselves up.
Interesting.
Rising to the challenge.
All right. So, Logan, you mentioned your parents put constraints on you a little bit, or some boundaries. Another big critique that I hear parents talk about is that, like, parents who are thinking about homeschooling or unschooling, or they're like, I can't do that, that's too weird, is they think that unschooling is literally opening up the back door of your house and letting the child walk out naked, eat foraging from plants out in the neighborhood. Like, that's what unschooling means, but what I'm hearing from you is that there were some boundaries, there was some kind of structure associated with this. Can you give us a bit more about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, mistake I see a lot of parents making these days is to be a little bit too loose with discipline with their kids. And I'm not trying to say you need to be an authoritarian and be a disciplinarian at all. Nothing like that. But I see people who let their kids run their entire lives and they just are miserable because of it. And the kids are badly behaved because of it. You need to enforce, I mean, you're the parent. You need to enforce some boundaries, and it doesn't have to be onerous at all. I never really felt oppressed by what my parents did with me. And it was very minimal. It was, behave yourself, talk with respect to your elders and to everybody else. If you've been on TV or the computer for 3 hours in a row, maybe go outside and take a lap around the house. Don't throw a tantrum. Like, that's pretty much it. It wasn't much more than that. But there was enough of a mutual respect and understanding there to know that we couldn't get away with acting like monsters. We had to act like civilized people. And we learned how to interact with adults. The one thing I think is great about unschooling is you learn how to interact with adults in the way that people who have been around their own age group their entire life never do. So I think you mature a lot faster in that sense, which is really cool. Yeah. But yeah, like, it's not complete anarchy. Is letting the kid direct their own education within the bounds of what's acceptable in society, and not be completely misbehaving and not be completely devoted to pointless activities like video games.
Yeah. So just to put a point on this, I talk about freedom and responsibility, and there's got to be some balance there. And what I heard from you is, you're free to do all sorts of things, but the responsibility is you have to behave a certain way in the home, right? And so, again, for parents that are listening, one, I hope kind of you're hearing about this idea that there are examples that you're going to hear about later in this fall that Logan's putting together, but also there's a little structure around this thing so that the child isn't feral, but the child is actually learning with I think the language you used earlier was you're facilitating their learning rather than quote unquote teaching them. So.
Yeah, but also, like, just opening the back door and letting them roam out in the outside, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think it's a lot of children will be well served by spending more time outside or in the neighborhood or in the city that they live in. There's a woman in New York who you probably have heard of named Lenore Skenazy, who was called the worst mom in the world because she let her child ride the subway by himself.
Right.
And, like, she's great, but, like, that's a wonderful example of, like, giving your child a little bit of responsibility and trusting them and saying, you can learn about the world by going out into the world and experiencing it. And we don't need to hold your hand and treat you like a baby. And I think that's really important because, like, I spent a lot of time outside as a kid, just running around and exploring the neighborhood, and you learn a lot that way. I mean, that's something else I want to hit on, is this idea that learning can take place anywhere in any situation. Learning doesn't have to come from a book. It doesn't have to come from a teacher. Like, going out and playing in the woods, you'll learn a lot about nature. You'll learn a lot about survival. You'll learn all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of the parents we talked to for this documentary spend a lot of time letting their kids play outside, and the kids are happier and healthier for it and more educated for it.
Nice. Good point.
I would also say, Matt, that, in my family, like, I have two children that are completely different. And I'm sure that's the same in everyone's family. Children are very diverse, and their needs for structure can be really different. And my need, I don't really like structure. So I didn't want to give my kids structure, but I actually had children that needed structure, more structure than was comfortable for me. So I learned that through experience and conversations, and really listening and observing them. And I think, the more we do this, the better relationship, the richer our relationship is with our children. They feel very heard and understood, and they're not going to rebel against that. They're not going to be a problem because they're being really listened to, and they're not pushing back.
Yeah, and, like, you can work with your child to kind of come up with a self-imposed structure. The structure doesn't have to come from outside. The child can say, "Hey, I'm having a hard time here. I need something." And you can say, "Well, let's come up with a schedule for you." And then the child can adhere to the schedule for as long as it works for them. And that's a great lesson in discipline and self-discipline and learning how to interact in the world. Like, when you get a job, you have to learn self-discipline. So having that kind of thing early on in life is really useful, and not something you're really taught in school, because all the structure comes from outside as an external constraint rather than something you're imposing on yourself.
Right.
And the medication, right? They're over medicating these kids.
Yes, that's a huge problem.
So I'll just on that point, Kath, I was just listening to a book called The Price You Pay for College. It is a fantastic book. It's like it describes the entire industry of higher education. And again, I've been on 2 university boards, and so I know this, but having him write this book, but he talked about how, and this is documented, 25% of students coming onto college campuses have some sort of medical, psychological medical dynamic. So they're coming from this educational environment that is just corroding their mental health, and then they show up on campus really broken, and the universities now are responsible for trying to deal with that. But in this book, it never talked about why is it that 25% of college students are showing up on campus, impacted like that. There's definitely some dynamics going on there about the pressure, about the lack of ability to explore and to be free, and the sense of like every test I take is make or break in my future. It's a really, really damaging structure, and so I'm becoming much more sensitive to that point, Kath.
Yeah, I think this is so important, and it's really sad to see what children are put through in terms of mental health and medication. And I think you see it in the statistics. There's high suicide rates among people who are put in high pressure educational systems where they're told if you don't get an A on this test, you're going to be a failure and you're never going to be able to succeed in life. That's really damaging. And like I always asterisk this when I say it because I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, but like I think the school shooting problem is really telling. You have people who are crammed into rooms together with people they can't escape, who are bullying them. And when you corner an animal, the animal gets violent. There's no outlet. There's no way to go anywhere else. And one of the things I would say about the last year is like when the schools were closed, how many school shootings did you see? How many of those people picked up guns and went to other places and shot people? Not very many. Saw virtually none because people didn't have that imprisonment complex where they were forced to be in this space that they couldn't escape. So I think that's really important. And then the drugging is really upsetting too, because I think there's such an overdiagnosis problem because we basically put out this mold and say you have to fit into this mold. And anybody who doesn't fit into that mold is considered to be damaged or mentally ill in some way. So we have to correct it with medication instead of recognizing that there is a natural variation in human behavior and human development that needs to be allowed to be explored a little bit. And maybe if a child has difficulty focusing in the classroom and can't sit still, it's not that they have a mental illness, it's that they're in the wrong place for them at that time in their life and they need to be allowed to do something else.
Bingo. So that reminds me, this issue of conformity. Kath, did I step on you there? Were you?
I was just gonna say that this generation also is the loneliest generation on history. And most of them are in school, so it's a beautiful thing to get them out of a place where they are lonely and to help them find one or two really, really good friends in their passions and interests and people that they can explore the world with. Yeah.
So this issue of like the idea of medication is again to try to force conformity. And right, so this child is acting out of line, so they need to be medicalized so that we can get them back into conformity. Logan, I know that you have written some things around conformity and around you care to speak to kind of what you have come to understand around the hyper conformity model that we have in education?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a book coming out in December called Conform or Be Cast Out. It's the literal demonization of nonconformists throughout history. Here it is, if you can see it. It's coming out December 1st.
Conform or Be Cast Out. It's about the demonization of nonconformists. Keep going.
So one of the things I look at this book is just the way that society has tried to punish not people who don't conform to the expectations throughout history. And education is a really important one, and mental illness is another important one. People who don't conform to your expectations get demonized in more ways than one. And in this book, I'm specifically looking at actual like literal demonization, where people are called witches or Satan worshipers or possessed by demons and things like that because of it. And you see it with medical problems all the time. Like mental illness used to be regarded as demonic possession because it was different and people didn't understand it. And I think you're seeing that now. It's kind of been reversed, whereas nonconformity is now called mental illness instead of just people being different. Anything that doesn't conform is now being called an illness, some kind of a pervasive, insidious disease that has to be corrected with either medication or surgery or, all kinds of horrible treatments that are really damaging to people. And so, I just wanted to trace that history and that lineage of society trying to punish things that don't fit into an expected box and how damaging that has been to people. Because when it comes down to it, nonconformity is necessary for progress. If everybody was the same, nothing would ever change. It would be fine. And, you know, I'm not defending all nonconformity, because obviously there's violence and there's things that need to be conformed to. But if you don't allow that kind of wiggle room for people to do things differently, you're never going to have any innovation. You're never going to have any progress. Society's never going to advance. And so I think it's a really damaging tendency of the big institutions in society, of which schools are a major one, to try to tamp down any kind of thing that breaks out of that mold and is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really that. Sorry, Matt, I'm going to barge in here because this is my passion. It's really resonating this line, because my passion is like helping people get out of being stuck in systems. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. We need a lot of different pathways, which is why I called my research and development company 100 Roads, you know, to get to where, you know, the diverse population that we are as humans, so that we can chart our own, we need enough fluidity so that we can actually chart our own courseway, our own pathway to get where we need to be going in life.
Yeah. So let me tell you a quick kind of story, if I could, from just my own example. And Logan, you mentioned this a little bit already, but so my son, I think I shared with some of our listeners may know this. So he, we hybrid homeschooled and then homeschooled, and then he wanted to go to public school in his high school years, and he went, and it was really frustrating for me to watch how much he had to conform. He had to conform to when he was studying, what he was learning. The books that he used to read before high school, he had to stop reading because he really didn't have the time to read things that he was interested in. He was into poetry. He was in all sorts of stuff, right? You know, geeky things actually he was into. But when COVID hit last year, he was free. He started reading. He read 30 books in the first couple months of COVID. He started playing the piano. He plays the piano now all the time. So COVID was this time when, you know, I watched this kid blossom when the 3 years previous, he was just being, you know, having to conform in order to fit this mold. And so I'm so hopeful that, you know, parents that watch your video, that hear a story like my son, can start to go, man, it's not that school is good enough. It's that school actually might be bad, and there's something that's far better that's just on the other side of it, if I could just actually figure out how to structure that. And so that's what I'm hoping that these conversations can actually start to germinate.
That's exactly right. And I think it's been a real silver lining of this whole pandemic that people are starting to see that and starting to realize the problems. We had one of the policy experts we interviewed for this said very succinctly and correctly, I think, that COVID didn't break the public school system. COVID just revealed the cracks that were already there. And now everyone can see the problems that were already existent, but they weren't aware of them because they didn't know anything else. And now you've given people a chance to escape that system for about a year. And they've been like, oh, well, this is different. This might be better. And they might find a different way of doing things. And so I'm real optimistic that that's going to improve things. If you look at the statistics on homeschooling, they have just skyrocketed in the last year. I think the number of homeschoolers in America has tripled, and the public support for school choice and for different forms of education has gone through the roof as well. So that's really good news, and I'm very optimistic about it.
Yeah. Okay, so now you had another book that you mentioned, Logan.
Oh, yeah, a little bit more relevant to our conversation than perhaps my current book. I had a book published in 2019 by the American Institute for Economic Research, and that book was called Our Servants, Our Masters, How Control Masquerades as Assistants. And the thesis of that book was to look at the term public servant and examine that in many cases, people who call themselves public servants are not actually interested in serving you at all. They're interested in controlling your behavior. And so I have a whole chapter on that book about education and about how, you know, we give all this praise to teachers and say they're the real heroes and they're amazing. And I don't want to, you know, be too negative on teachers because there's a lot of great ones out there, but there's a lot of administrators and there's a lot of teachers who are more interested in controlling the behavior of their students than in actually letting them blossom and find their own path. And so it has more to do with the establishment and the government funding and the Department of Education than with the individual teachers, but that's a big part of that book.
Yeah, well, I have lots. So my mother was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, my great grandparents. I mean, we had teachers all through, right? And when I talk to my mom, it's actually not the teacher, it's the system that they're in that forces
Right.
teachers to behave in certain ways, right? So, you know, when my mom grew up, when she was teaching, she was much freer to do things back, you know, 50 years ago now. But now there's no freedom, right? Teachers are just as locked in as their students are. And so it is, in my view, it's a system failure that everybody a part of the system now is in some ways corrupted or dirty as a result of the system they're in.
That's exactly right. And like the teachers have so little freedom, especially with the standardized testing. There was a scandal a few years ago with the Georgia public schools where they were all caught giving out the answers to the standardized test to the students.
Yep.
And it's like, you want to blame the teacher for that, but actually, no, it's not the teacher for that. It's the fact that these are the incentives. That's the position they're put in, where if their students in their class don't get good scores on the test, then they're punished for that. And so what do you think is going to happen?
Right.
It's just a terrible set of incentives. My training is largely in economics. And so I think about everything in terms of incentives. And if you put people in a situation where the incentives are bad, you're going to get bad outcomes every single time.
Bingo. Bingo. Kath, what were you saying?
Oh, you know, it's just so sad to me because I just see every child as an individual, you know, a little special gift that we should nurture and really unlock the potential of each individual, you know, essence that we are around. And I was a teacher too, but you really don't have time because you are teaching and they're units, really. They're not individual humans. They are units in the system. And it's like, are they performing, not performing? It's really sad to spend 12 years of your life being a unit, right? Especially when we have so many great alternatives. And I really do believe it's 2 to 3 times better outside the school system now. And you can get you can get YouTube's pretty much on anything, but you can get any course, accredited, dual enrollment, and you can do it at your own schedule. There's so much available out there. So you don't even have to teach now, right? You're just there as really a parent coach. And you as a parent can really unlock the potential of your child.
That's right.
Other than, you know, just dropping it off at a school and expecting them and, you know, washing your hands of that. But you mentioned, Logan, that you were really close to your parents, you know, from this experience. And I think that is the biggest gift that I got from homeschooling 2 children is how close we are and how much we love each other and how much we listen to each other. And we care about everybody's things. Like they really care about what I'm doing and I care obviously about what my children are doing, but we're all supporting each other. And we're helping each other wherever we can, you know, to further each other's agendas. And I don't see that in my children's peers.
Yeah, it's become such a better relationship than just a simple like authority figure who's just there to enforce the rules and say you have to be at school at this time, you have to be at piano practice at this time, you have to do all these things, because the child has a say, the child has a voice in what happens. And I think that's really important. And it helps build a tighter relationship. If both sides are willing to listen to each other and treat each other with respect, it builds a much tighter bond. And I think that a lot of people have very low expectations of children these days and very negative opinions of them. And it's a real shame because kids are amazing and they can do so much if they're given the chance. But I just know so many people who are like, well, my kids are terrible. If I let them run wild, they're just going to be the worst people ever. And I'm like, well, maybe you should talk to them, you know, give them a little trust, give them a little rope and see what they do with it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, once that dynamic is between the parent and the child, it's really hard to undo that. You almost need to like leave and go out into the woods and just live alone in the woods, right? Because once the parent sees the child as lazy, then therefore all activities that the child is going to do is going to have to be forced on them. And so again, a lot of what we're talking about here is the earlier we can have these conversations with parents, the more likely the parent will go, boy, my 3-year-old, he's really curious, right? Having that same conversation with a 13-year-old is a lot harder because there's just a lot of water under the bridge and a lot of torment and stress that has come into the system. So
possible damage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you should focus on what your kid's good at and interested in rather than what they're bad at. I think the natural tendency people have is to say, oh, my kid's not good at math, my kid's not good at reading, and let's focus on that. Like, leave that. That'll come later. Leave that alone, and instead focus on what they're interested in and what they're passionate about and what they're good at, and encourage that, and then let the rest come on their own. Like I see so many people who think that oh, if I don't teach my kid to read by 6, they're going to be behind the rest of their life. And I'm like,
Right.
really? You don't think that being surrounded by language constantly your entire life, they're not going to learn how to read? They're going to be like totally permanently disadvantaged because they didn't learn at 6 years old. Like lots of people learn later and they're totally fine to just do it in your own time. Give people a little trust.
Well, but this paradigm of school is so powerful, though, Logan.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The reason that again, I felt it. Right? I had to I had to unlearn this stuff, and it took a lot of years and a lot of conversations like this with people like Kath and others that helped me to see this. Right? So, but you know, the idea that 18 is the time that like your learning needs to move to the next level, right? Or to college, right? That's 18 is the time period. And so everything before 18 is really preparation for what happens after 18. That doesn't make any sense. Again, if you think about it, it makes no sense. And so I'm curious with you, you sounded like you were interested in college. Did you start taking college courses early? Did you wait until 18? Did you go 19? Like what happened on that deal?
I did take one college course a year early, yeah, and then I was interested in it because I liked learning, and I thought, oh, college is 4 years where I get to do nothing but exclusively learn. That sounds pretty good. So, and I got to choose the classes I wanted to take. So, yeah, I wanted to go, and I enjoyed my time at college, and I did take a class early. My sister actually went to college a year early because she was itching to go. She wanted to do it. She wanted to study art at this. She went to the Savannah College of Art and Design.
Oh yeah,
studied illustration. And she went a whole year early because she was excited to go and did great, no problems, perfectly successful GPA, and got an advanced. She has actually an advanced degree in education now, which is kind of funny because she's unschooling her 2 kids. But I enjoyed college, but I certainly don't think it's for everybody. I mean, people need to decide what they want to do. It's really expensive. It's really time consuming. There's a big opportunity cost to it. And if you would rather do something else, if you're passionate about computers, go into IT. If you're passionate about machines, maybe become a mechanic or study that and see if you want to do that. Trade schools are great. Like getting a job as a teenager is great to help you figure out what you want to do with your life. And like one of the problems I think with college is there's this idea that you pick your major and then that's what you do for the rest of your life. And that's not the way most people work. Most people they have to bounce around and figure out what they're interested in. The things I wanted to do when I was 18 are not the same things I want to do now. And I think that's true with most people. Like my first degree was in Russian. I'm not using Russian at all now. And then I got a degree in music, and then I got a degree in economics. And I'm kind of using both of those at the moment because I do some composition for our videos, but I'm not using the Russian at all. I don't know what I was thinking getting that degree. Completely useless.
Well, so far, you don't know what's going to happen in the future.
It might come up later. Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, it does make sense. It is one of these weird deals that, well, first off, I think it would be kind of sad if you did learn something at age 18 and then that really was all that you wanted to learn and study for the rest of your life. Yeah, maybe there's people that do that, but I don't know anybody who didn't want to explore and to learn other things throughout their entire life. So, all right, we got just a couple minutes left. Kath, hit them with the question that we ask all of our guests.
Okay.
So I always ask the same question. So this is about as you were unschooling in your, let's say your childhood into your teen years, what did you wish existed in the world that would have made your life more meaningful? Like outside the school system. Like if we could make something for unschoolers now, what would that be?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer for it. I was a pretty happy kid. I was very satisfied with most of what I did. I think the main thing that was a problem for me as an unschooler is just the general lack of acceptance by the rest of society, and like the fear that sometimes my parents would be like, you come inside and don't play outside right now because the truant officers are out. They might see you and they might give you a hard time. Or, like one time we went to the doctor and the doctor was very anti-homeschooling and was like threatening to call the social services or whatever on us. And so like that general public hostility is something that I think was the biggest obstacle to me as an unschooler. But there was plenty of resources I never wanted for company. I never wanted for educational resources. And so I really didn't have a problem with it. I think it's just a lack of public knowledge and education on it that is really holding people back.
Great answer. I laugh because I went to the doctor with my youngest, I don't know, last week before last. And the doctor was asking her questions like, what grade are you in? She's like, well, I guess I'm kind of a junior. What school do you go to? Well, I kind of take a class here. Well, what do you do during the day? Well, I've got a job, and the doctor didn't know what to make of this, and I'm just sitting there kind of smiling, going, "Okay, I know the doctor's like, do I call CPS? Do I call Child Protective Services or what?" But yeah, there's definitely a real confusion around what this sort of thing looks like. But man, I tell you, it's beautiful when you see it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Well, my last question, real briefly, is if now what you know of school may be limited, but what is one thing that you could change if you could wave the magic wand and change about school? What would be that one thing?
I'd get rid of compulsory schooling laws personally. I think the fact that you're mandated by law to be there, that's the bad thing. Give people an escape hatch. If they like it there and they want to stay, great, but let them get out if they want to get out.
I'm down with that.
One thing I would change.
I'm down with that. I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think that brings a lot of benefits. So listen, Logan, thank you so much for being on When School's Not Working. Logan Albright, author, documentarian. We look forward to having you back on the show when your documentary comes out, and we'll have some more conversations then. All right.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Great. For When School's Not Working, I'm Matt, and for Kath, we'll say goodnight. Take care, guys.
All right. Thank you.